I'm pleased to be able to welcome you to what we believe is the 21st of this very successful series of Fireside Chats, and it's successful because you come along and help make it happen, from subjects past to subjects present, and I'm pleased to say a subject in future, Avi, who said that he'll be our next subject. But let's not talk about what's coming next. Let's talk about what's happening tonight. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce to the community's oral history project Clive Grossman, who will be introduced better by Sharon Sir, of course, because Clive and I arrived within 7 days of each other. Him from a more fraught pursuit and me from London. Clive very early showed that he was a leader amongst men, and I've been following, somewhat dabbling behind in his wake since, so it's a pleasure to be able to stand in front of him, if only for a minute or two tonight. Please don't forget that the Jewish Historical Society publishes books, monographs and postcards. We've got a new series of greetings cards, familiar pictures by the community's own top artist, Louise Soloway. Please have a look at those cards afterwards and see if you can invest a penny or two. And we have other events that go on. Please keep your eyes on the web shots that Howard sends out for us. But I won't keep you very long. We have limited time. Sharon and Clive Grossman, please.
Clive, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. You were born in London.
Yeah, I was born in London during the war, 7th of July 1940. I always remember it because it's Ringo Starr's birthday. So.
Can you also play the drums?
No, I can't, but that's how I know my birthday.
So you were born very much in wartime London. Did you spend all the war years in London as a young boy?
No, I was born in Middlesex Hospital. My parents were from the East End of London, but they were bombed, I think, while I was in hospital. So we were evacuated to Macclesfield.
And you and your mother travelled to Macclesfield?
Yes, yeah, my father was in the army.
Is the microphone not working for you?
It's fine this side.
Okay, can you hear now?
You're born, seems to me.
Now you can even sing like Ringo Starr. There's no problem now. What do you remember of Macclesfield as an evacuee child?
Well, I don't remember much about Macclesfield, but I remember my mother telling me that it was a town of widows and spinsters, because during the First World War, everybody from there had joined up together and they were all killed one afternoon on the Somme. And there were hardly any men in their 30s or 40s left. That's what I remember about Macclesfield.
And did you spend the entire war in Macclesfield?
No, we came back. I still have vague memories of sitting in the air raid shelters and the bombing.
My goodness.
Not very strong memories, but I've got some memories of it. And then when the V1 rockets came over in late 1944, we went back.
And your father served in the war? Or?
Yeah, my father, he was called up in 1939, 1940. He served as, he was an infantryman. He was ended up as a sergeant, but his story was an unusual one. He landed on D-Day. He fought as an infantryman all the way up through France, Belgium, Holland, into Germany. And towards, right at the very end of the war, this is a story he told me, he was in charge of a section of a platoon, and his officer said to him, Sergeant Grossman, go and examine, find out what that terrible smell is over on the horizon. And he took his men in, and he was the first person, certainly the first Jew, to enter Belsen concentration camp. And he tells the story of, he went in, of course he'd seen a lot of suffering during the war, but the faintest idea of what had happened is people didn't. And he went in, staggered, people were lying dead all over the place. He saw a German soldier, he called him over, and this German soldier ran over to him, ran over somebody laying on the ground. My father shouted at him, he said, that my father spoke Yiddish quite well, so Yiddish, and the German understood him, and he said, he said, why were you standing on him? He said, please sir, he was only a Jew. So my father shot him. And he had his Magen David around his neck, and all these Jewish people suddenly saw, they couldn't believe it. There was a Jew shooting a German officer, and the other Germans just standing to attention. Anyway, that was, I think that had a tremendous effect on him. Like so many other people who were there, who were survivors, he didn't talk about it much after the war. But I believe it was one of the reasons why he died early. He died in his early 50s. He used to have nightmares occasionally about it.
And it wasn't possible for you to talk to your father about it? He just wouldn't be drawn into conversations like this?
He just didn't like to talk about it. He said, that's not something we talk about, let's talk about something else. But now and again he would mention it. My mother told me, and he had nightmares, I know.
So your father returned at the end of the war. You'd
Yes.
been born pretty much at the beginning of it.
Yeah.
Was that the first introduction you had to your father?
Basically, yes. So I remember being very shy about him. There was his photographs there. My sister was born towards the end of the year. And he was so, I think, traumatized by it. He said to my mother, we've got to leave this place. We've got to go where there's no discrimination. By discrimination, of course, he meant discrimination against Jews. So we went to Rhodesia, which was in the middle of Africa. Of course, there was discrimination, but not as he understood it.
London to Rhodesia is quite a journey. What age were you when you left London?
7.
7
I was
years
7,
ago.
yes.
And can you remember anything about your journey there? Was
Yeah,
it
we went
straightforward
by ship. We went by ship. Everybody on the ship was ex-military or RAF, and we went by it. It took about 6 weeks. It was great fun. That's what I remember about it. And everybody used to sit around in the lounges, and the parents would tell war stories.
And you arrived, you travelled through the Suez Canal to get
Through
there?
the Suez Canal, through the Mediterranean, Suez Canal, eventually arrived at Beira in Mozambique, Portuguese East Africa it was called then.
And did your father have a plan of action? Was there a house for you to move into? Did he have a job to walk into?
Not really. It was easy enough for, he left school when he was 14, so he had no real qualifications, but he was a handyman, and he was basically a carpenter. And everybody said to him, don't worry, when you get to Rhodesia, you'll find a job easily enough, which he did. He had a job, he got a job as a carpenter.
And for you, and for your baby sister, sort of probably not so traumatic, but for you, 7 years of age, so aware of your surrounding, do you remember going into a new school? Was it a Jewish school? Was there a Jewish community available for you?
Certainly not a Jewish school, but there was a Jewish community. But we lived really in what you have to say was the poorer part. We were new immigrants. There weren't many Jewish new immigrants. My parents, it was a long way to the shore. We didn't have a car, couldn't afford taxis. So, knowing I was Jewish, went to an ordinary school. Most of the kids there were children of ex-military people, even if they'd been in the Rhodesian army. Yeah.
And there was a Haida classes organised, and
Yeah.
it was an Ashkenazi community?
Yes. As I got a bit older and the mitzvah came along, I got more involved. The young people there were all involved in Habonim or Shtilim or Shomrim, whatever it was. We were all involved in it. We used to then go to Hebrew classes, learning for the bar mitzvah. But there was, as I discovered then, a very, very strict division between Ashkenazi and Sephardic. We had our shul, they had their shul. We never mixed. We didn't go to their bar mitzvahs, they never came to ours. It's true. And as we got a bit older, the parents discouraged us very much so from taking out the other girls or the other boys. And there was them, the Sefs as we called them, the Sephardic. It was us, I don't know what they called us, but it wasn't very polite. It's not that we were unfriendly with them, they were, to us, they were as kind of foreigners, say, the Catholics or Christians were. They were just different.
Habanim must have been a great experience for you as a young, growing up Jewish boy. Yeah. Introduction to the Zionist movement with other kids.
Absolutely.
From all over Africa or all over the world?
Well, not those days the world didn't travel like it does today, but it was really Rhodesia. We used to go every year, at the end of the year, to Machane, to camp in Cape Town or East London in South Africa. But that's where I developed really my understanding, my knowledge of Judaism.
Come 16 years of age.
Yes.
Were you planning university? Were you?
Well, I left school when I was 16. I had this vague idea I wanted to be a lawyer. You've got to bear in mind, this is 1956, no TV. My idea of what a lawyer was very vague indeed. And I wasn't very good at maths, I wasn't very good at science. So accounting was out, engineering was out, medicine was out. They used to say a lawyer was a Jewish boy who couldn't stand the sight of blood. So I kind of fell into law, by accident, as it will, by default. But my parents were not well off. They couldn't really afford to send me to university. So they were very friendly with a lawyer, a solicitor. And he said, oh, Clive doesn't need to go to university. He can come and work for me, do articles. So I was 16 at the time. And the next 3 years, I think, were probably the worst of my life because I was absolutely useless. I have to say that, as a solicitor. Absolutely useless. First of all, I was too young. 16, what do you know? Especially you've never seen TV or film, you didn't know what lawyers did. And I just had no idea what was going on, to be honest. It really was the only part I enjoyed. Eventually I had to go and do national service, 4.5 months in the army, and that was quite fun. It was a break anyway.
And what unit were you in the army?
Oh, well, at that stage it was just training, just infantry.
And did you develop any kind of expertise?
None whatsoever. Not at that stage. Later I did.
Not in the army, not in the law at that stage?
None whatsoever. My teenage years were pretty ordinary.
You did eventually manage to escape life in the solicitor's office, which,
yes,
let me tell you, is much more fun these days. But you escaped the solicitor's office for
yes,
university. Where did you go?
Yeah, eventually went to the University of Cape Town. 5-year course, had a marvellous time, enjoyed every single minute of it, I have to say. And played a lot of rugby and cricket. I was not good at either of them, but I played a lot of rugby and cricket. I enjoyed it enormously, had a wonderful time there. Then I came back.
Back to?
Rhodesia to practice. I worked for the government for a while, then went to private practice. But at this stage in Rhodesia, now we're talking now mid-60s, there started to be problems, what we call in African townships, yes, etc. So I was back in the army as a territorial. We had on camp, and that gradually developed more and more. And eventually, I moved into the intelligence corps. And it was a very, as the years went by, it became more and more of a war, a real war.
At 19 years of age, you're doing your military service, you're living in this environment. Were you aware of apartheid and the prejudice that was a living act around you, or?
The honest answer is no. We were white And this was what we did. And the honest answer is, we always said to each other, oh, black people never rule themselves. They never rule themselves. It's actually true.
So it is simply part of your environment. Now, in April, so around about Pesach time, April 1967,
Yes.
You met this gorgeous woman who was to become your wife. In April 1967, once you met her and had your first date, was this the beginning of a very long courtship?
Well, what happened was, by this stage, the apartheid war between Sephardi and Ashkenazis had come down. My sister had been one of the forefront and had married a Sephardi, and we suddenly discovered the wonderful food that they had. I have to say, a lot better than the filter fish, etc. We loved it. And the family started mixing, etc. We started taking out Ashkenazi girls. And two or three houses from where I lived, there was a couple there who, by marriage now, my sister was related to. And they said to my mother, look, we got this girl coming down from the Congo. She doesn't know anybody. Would Clive take her out? I said, all right, I'll do you a favour. And 10 days later, we got engaged. Now, I always say it was a misunderstanding.
Because?
Well, Kitty didn't speak much English, I didn't speak French. It was a misunderstanding. I always say to my children, you see what happens? You rush into things. That was 45 years ago.
Mazel tov. And you're coming up for your 45th wedding
Yeah,
anniversary. You were
I
married
believe so,
in December of
December,
67.
that's right. Yes, thanks for reminding me.
And having had this whirlwind romance from
Yes.
this Sephardic wonder from the Congo,
Yeah.
how long were you actually together?
Well, she then went back because
After 10 days?
yeah, I think so. Yes, it was about 10 days. She had to go back and clear up things, tell her parents who didn't know. Bear in mind, those are the days there were sanctions against Rhodesia in those days. There was no telephone communication with the Congo. And even to get to the Congo could go via this country and that country. They would go and wrap up things, tell her parents the bad news, she married an Englishman, she married an Englishman. And we could very little communicate. And she came back in October.
So you were separated for 6 months. You knew each other for 10 days, got
Yeah.
engaged, and were then separated for 6 months.
Yeah, and we wrote, but letters often didn't get through. Even phone was practically impossible. So, you know, I was hoping, I knew the date was coming, I was hoping she would turn up, and she actually did. But when Kitty got off the plane, she was carrying a little baby, which worried me a bit. But she'd come with there was a lot of problems in the Congo at the time. And her cousin's wife, who had a baby a few months before, they thought, let her go. She sent her off, so the three of them came together. I didn't know that at the time. I would go about and trying to recognise which one was mine.
So you married your gorgeous fiancée really just months after meeting her.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you must look at some of these beautiful photographs. Ketty is like a model in these photographs. And I have to tell you, Clive, although his hair was a different colour, also hasn't changed. And for those of you who know sort of British comedians, he looks remarkably like Eric Walker. You'll see. So you got married, you settled down, you were just getting to know each other. Children presumably came much later, so you had time to get to know each other.
Well, what happened was, a few months after we got married, we still remember, we went shopping one morning and Kitty vomited in the supermarket. And we were too naive to realise, I thought, it must have been something she ate. Didn't realise it was morning sickness at the time. And you know, those were the days when, you know, these things were very sensitive and all that. And she became quite big quite early on. And of course people started counting the months, etc., etc. And I'll never forget, She went to the doctor and phoned me up, I was at work, and said, confirmed, I'm pregnant. Please don't tell anybody because, you know, people start counting the months and all that. And so I said, okay, I went. I walked downstairs and I saw a friend. He said, oh, Mazel Tov, I can get to It was a very small town.
And for the record, Danny came 10 months after
It
the
came
wedding.
after the wedding, yeah.
And did you make any decision at that stage? You're a young married couple. Did you decide to stay with the Ashkenazi community or join the Sephardic community?
Well, Kitty's parents didn't speak English, and they were true Sephardi from the Congo. There were a lot of Sephardi people in the Congo, on the island of Rhodes. And so I said, yeah, I haven't been much of a shul girl, I have to say. And I said, all right, I'll go to the Sephardi shul. We got married at the Sephardi shul. And I stayed as a member of the Sephardi shul and became a committee member. And in fact, the only thing I really achieved there was still this old kind of apartheid mentality. In the nursery school, I think there were 13 Ashkenazi children, and there was a war, and there was 3 Sephardi children, or maybe the other way around. And I said, we've got to take it down, so the children can play together. And there was a huge amount of dissatisfaction about it, I have to say. People said, but you know, you let them mix, they start marrying each other, you know. There was an apartheid mentality.
So that was your first flavour of Jewish community politics.
Absolutely,
and how
yeah.
walls have got to be brought down.
Yeah,
Kol hakavod, you did good. Now listen, in 1970 you joined the bar. You became a barrister in
yes.
Salisbury.
Yes.
Was that a big decision for you?
Yeah, well, you know, I'd been in the government as a prosecutor before that. We didn't have an awful lot of money, so it was a bit of a risk, but it worked out. And
I understand that even at that stage you nearly left the law to secure a higher career, that as an angel.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I was telling you this story, it's really odd. We had a friend, his name was Charles Harlow, he wasn't Jewish. He'd been a magistrate, and then we'd heard he'd had a nervous breakdown, gone into a mental home, and then we heard he'd come out again, and they couldn't make him a magistrate, so they put him in the Ministry of Justice as a clerk. And one day I'm sitting in my office, and the receptionist says, Mr. Harlow to see you. It was lunchtime. So he comes in, and we say hello, and how are you, etc., etc. He says to me, Clive, I've got a very important matter to talk to you about. I said, yes. He said, I am the Son of God, and I've chosen you to be my voice on earth. Of course, the first question I asked him, is this your first visit or your second visit? I needed to make sure. He said, oh, don't worry. Through you we'll explain to everybody, all the major religions are right. So he's telling me all this stuff about the angels came, and this came, and he read this bit from the Torah, and this from the New Testament. He said to me, you're having trouble believing this, aren't you? I said, well, it's a big shock, I have to say. So he said to me, if I do a miracle, will that help? I said, yes, miracles are good, yes. So he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll make the sun lose its power. I said, that would be a good miracle. He said, come downstairs into the street. Now, bear in mind, this is lunchtime. Everybody's walking around there. And he said to me, now, I'm going to talk to the sun. You're going to have to put your hands over your eyes. I don't have to because I'm the Son of God. So I stand there feeling an absolute fool with my hands over my eyes, and he's standing there with his eyes scrunched up because he's looking at the sun, and he said, "Sun, lose your power." And he's shouting there, everybody walking past over there. "Sun, lose your power." And then a cloud passes over the sun. He says, "Well, you see, I've made it." Anyway, we go back to my office, and he's telling me all the plans about what I'm going to do. And all. I said to him, "Charles, if you were the Son of God, why do you need me to speak?" So he said, "Well, you know what it's like in the government. I don't get off work till 5 It's an absolutely true story. Anyway, the next day my problem was solved. there was a headline in the paper, former magistrate found running naked in the streets. So they locked him up and that was it. But I remember telling Rabbi Zadok, I could have been a saint.
I'm sure that he tells you you're a saint every single day.
Or Clive Iscariot.
So you had to stay with the law, and
Yeah.
I presume because you became so successful, you were able to charge $100 trillion for your first brief fee. Now that's not a bad brief fee to
Not
bring
quite,
home to your wife.
yeah. That came later. That was after we left, when inflation was rampant. They couldn't really figure it out, 500 million % or something like that. And that's $100 trillion note. I've got the original, at least I had it, unless you take it away.
Me? You gave it to me.
Yeah, it was 100 trillion, this was much later after we left, $100 trillion note. And I'm told in the morning, when they printed it, you could buy a loaf of bread. By 11 o'clock in the morning, half a loaf of bread.
So life was complicated in Salisbury. You settled down, you were at the bar, you
Yeah.
had a second child by then.
Yes,
And
yeah.
Danny, your first child,
Yeah.
was at Jewish school by then in Salisbury.
Yeah, Danny went to the Jewish, we had a very good Jewish school by then. Sharon School was a very good school indeed. And he really did extremely well there. But I remember once he came home, he must have been about 9 or 10, and he said to us, the school's putting on a concert at the end of the year, and they're doing Noah, as a musical. We said, oh, that's very nice. Are you in it? He said, yes. I'm playing God, but it's a very small part.
So life continued. You were in an environment where you had to go for regular military
Yes,
service as a volunteer or as a...
No. Everybody, there was conscription by them. And I'd been in the army all along, gradually went up through the ranks. And theoretically, you were in for 6 weeks and then out doing the job for 6 weeks. But I was in intelligence, so I could do work at nights, as it were, fight nights, as it were.
Mm. Your official role was that of as an interrogator? You were...
Well, I had different roles, different times, counterintelligence, interrogator, counterinterrogation, that type of thing, yeah.
Mm. And people must ask if that's helped you with your incisive cross-examination style.
You're not allowed to hit people when you cross-examine.
Tempted they were my
We didn't do that.
You spent some time in the bush.
Yes.
And that must have been an extraordinary environment.
Yes. As far as I know, nobody ever shot at me, and I never shot at anybody else. But there was one incident that I always remember. There were elections going on, and I had a platoon. I was a captain at that stage. I had a platoon which was guarding a particular farming area. And a farmer came to me and he said, look, we're putting on a barbecue, or briflace as we called it then, for your platoon, and a lot of the local farmers will be coming. And we arranged to go. And he said to me, oh, by the way, you may know that King Leka, who was the pretender to the throne of Albania, is coming. He farms down the road. A tiny bit of history. The King of Albania in 1940 was King Zog. He got thrown out by the Germans, and his son was King Leka, and then the communists took over. So he'd always been in exile, but regarded himself as the pretender to the throne of Albania. And he farmed near there. Anyway, on the night of the barbecue, went along and I was introduced as Captain Clive Grossman to the king. And a very tall, nice-looking man, spoke beautiful English. And the farmer said to him one stage, is your wife coming? Oh yeah, she'll be coming. 10 minutes later, while I was chatting to him with this and that, I see a very attractive blonde in denim was walking up. He said, oh, here she is. He pulled himself up, stood to attention, and he said, my dear, permit me to introduce you to Captain Clive Grossman of the Rhodesian Security Forces. Captain Grossman, I present to you Her Majesty, the Queen of Albania. And I didn't know whether it's a curtsy or bow. And Her Majesty said to me, G'day, Clive, call me Sheila. She was from Queensland.
So you're a good cultural mix there.
Yeah.
1980 brought the end of the war.
Yes.
Rhodesia became Zimbabwe.
Yes.
You decided to stay there, stayed at the bar, or?
Well, what had happened, we'd actually been here in Hong Kong in 1975. We were very involved in an organisation called Round Table, which was Lions, like Lions and Rotary, etc. We had a world conference here in 1975, and we both loved it. And I was writing here to see if I could get a job, but with sanctions against Rhodesia, it was very difficult. 1980 came, and we thought, well, we'll give it a go, see what it's like. But it was pretty clear that things weren't going very well at all there. And then, out of the blue, Frank Stock, who's a member of this community and was working here, came along, and he came to bring me regards from a friend, and asked him about getting a job here, and that's the way it worked.
Before that, though, you were in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
You decided to leave private practice and enter the judiciary.
Well, I was offered what happened, I sat as a High Court judge there in Bulawayo for a while, and it was a big deal because I was the first white after independence to be offered it.
What kind of procedure was it? You had to apply for it, or were you sworn in especially?
Well, what happened was I was phoned up by the Chief Justice saying, would I like to sit as a temporary judge? And I said, yes, fine, thank you. And then I had to go and be sworn in by, and don't laugh, President Banana. That was his name, President Kane Banana, at Government House. And so I went on there because every time he sneezed, it was all over the newspapers and things like that. So it was full of press and photographers and all this. And then we had to go and walk in the garden with our hands behind our backs, like Prince Charles, and for photo opportunities. Now I'd been in Government House when it was, we'd had a previous governor, and it was beautiful. Now there was chickens running around, and babies growing, and things like that. Anyway, he said to me, Mr. Grossman, what do you do in your spare time? And I said to him, I'm an ardent Zionist. Now, to say that in those days, because they were very much pro-Palestine Liberation Order and all that kind of thing, was very provocative. You couldn't really say that. But I knew I could say it to him because he recognized me and I recognized him, and he'd been one of my informers in the past, so he could say anything about it.
So it was good to be connected and be known as the good interrogator. So you said as a judge you were doing civil cases?
We did everything. We did crime and civil. A lot of murder cases, but murder in those days, well, I suppose still now, you had the death penalty there, but if you could show self-defense or that kind of thing, or a genuine belief in witchcraft, you didn't get the death penalty. And frankly, I was not keen to pass the death penalty, so I always used to find an excuse. And genuine belief in witchcraft was just about any murder involved witchcraft.
And you must have been involved or aware at the time of the tribal differences in Bulawayo.
Yeah, I mean, without going into too much history, Bulawayo is in Matabele land. Salisbury, where I was, and Harare, where I was Mashona land. The Mashonas, which Mugabe was 2/3, and the Matabele 1/3. And after the war finished, the independence war, the whites were no longer a threat. We decided to carry on. But the problem was always the Matabele. And what Mugabe did, he had trained by North Korea a brigade which went into Matabele land and just killed people. They must have killed 20,000, 200,000, I don't remember. And when I was sitting in Bulawayo there, every day the police and all that would come back with terrible tales of what had happened, but the press would report nothing. The local press, the first thing that Mugabe's government had done was to take over the media, and so they wouldn't report it. But after I got back to Harare, I had a lunch with a friend from BBC, and he knew all these people from Time and Newsweek. And I said to him, why aren't you reporting this? Everybody knows all about these massacres going on. And they said, well, now that Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, it's a good story, not a bad story. And our editors are not interested in bad news about Zimbabwe. So, I mean, that started my lifelong dislike of the press. I don't believe anything of it.
So Zimbabwe is a good story. You're living in Bulawayo with a good job as a judge. At this stage, I know you'd asked Frank Stock to help you find a job. But you must have been living in lovely accommodation, given all the respect one would hope to be given to a High Court judge.
Well, I was only an acting judge, so I went back to Salisbury. Then they offered me full-time judge, and this was another big deal. The first white man to be offered it, and I said no. And that was, by then I was pretty sure I was going to come to Hong Kong.
And was that an easy process?
It wasn't an easy process. Well, first of all, there were problems. My mother and my sister were still there. But we decided we just had to do this for the children. One of the problems is we had to fill in forms about, there had to be a security clearance. And this was taking ages. And I had a friend here who eventually said to me, look, the problem is, in Hong Kong, half the special branch think you're a fascist because you were fighting under Ian Smith. The other half think that you're a communist because you're living under Robert Mugabe. So can you get something done yourself with the British Embassy? That's how it happened. There was a restaurant where I used to go quite often for lunch, and there was a table there, and everybody knew that was where the CIA guy was there, the KGB, MI5, the Mossad guy, as far as I know. They all used to sit and have lunch every day together. And the English guy from MI5 I met socially, I went up to him and I said, look, and I told him the problem, and I said, look, can you sort things out for me? He said, but I'm Secretary for Arts and Culture. I said, oh, come on. Everybody knows you're MI5. They said, oh, all right. A few weeks later, it was all sorted out. And then, of course, Mike and Melanie Hartman were friends, and Mike's given his story of why he came, but we came more or less the same time.
Ketty was disappointed to be leaving Bulawayo. She was happy and settled where she was.
We're in Harare, not Bulawayo. No, Ketty was very anxious to leave. She had a very bad time in the Congo, and one day she'll tell her story. She had a bad time in the Congo. I mean, she'd been decolonized in the Congo, decolonized in Rhodesia. She was very keen to leave, so that made it easy.
No ultimatums given, though.
No ultimatums given.
So you arrived in Hong Kong in 1983, so 29 years ago.
Correct.
And just about now, just before Rosh Hashanah.
Yes, what happened, bear in mind, we left a place that was deteriorating, and we were very happy to be here, but almost the first week we got here, things were deteriorating here. The dollar was not pegged and it was dropping. The stock market crashed. Property market was arrested. People from Carrion, Georgetown, and all those, and everything was falling to pieces here. And we had Typhoon Ellen, which was the worst typhoon for years. And everybody was saying it was full of doom and gloom. We felt completely at home.
What did you do?
I was a prosecutor, but I suppose in a way I was lucky. I was lucky actually, because that week they'd arrested, those of you who were here at the time will remember the Carrion case. They just arrested all those people, and they said to me, we're putting together a prosecution team, and I was on it, and that was right from the very beginning until the end of it. I was involved with the Carrion prosecution, which stood me in good stead ultimately.
You came just before Rosh Hashanah. Did you have any idea about the Jewish community in Hong Kong before you came?
We knew the Stocks were here, and Mike and Melanie came at the same time, but we had no idea, really. And we got in touch, and they said, well, I think Mike had got in touch. told us where the shul was, and we said, well, can we actually come to the shul? They said, yes, please do. So we came first night Rosh Hashanah, and really, in a way, that was the beginning of our love affair with Ohalea. The people were so warm, so welcoming, so friendly, and that was really, we had a wonderful introduction to Ohalea, to the Jewish community, which we've always enjoyed.
It must have been quite a different environment 29 years ago. Ohalea would have been the central community for the entire Jewish community.
Yes, there was only one Jewish community in those days, and that was here. And I remember that year, when everybody fitted into the shul. It was a much smaller community. It was strange in some ways. I remember we were not observant, I have to say, not particularly observant. This was here. They had the synagogue where it is, and the old Jewish recreation club, and for dinners, for lunches, there was meat, there was milk, there was the butter next to it, you know. And it wasn't until Rabbi Avton came, and he made it kosher.
You've been involved in the board with your Jewish communities back in Rhodesia. Did you feel drawn to getting involved in Jewish community politics or community activity at an early stage?
Politics is perhaps the right word, but no, I didn't. So first of all, there were so many other new people here, and people who've been here for many years. We were trying to establish a life here. Later on, I think, but not the early years.
You say you were not particularly observant. I mean, whoever knows what that means. You come to shul, you're Jewish, you're observant, you are who you are. But you are a spiritual person, and you became aware perhaps more of your spirituality around the time of your mother's illness in August 1997?
Yeah. What happened was my mother was still in Rhodesia in 1997. August 1997, and we used to go back every year, of course, and she was not well. She had a heart problem, and I'd gone back in July, and it was clear to me that she was drawing to a close, she died in August. And the story my sister tells me, and I tell you immediately, my sister and her husband are not imaginative people, but this is the story they tell me. They'd been to see her. She had terrible arthritis in her legs, and she was in a lot of pain. And they were in hospital, visiting her in the ward, in her room, and my brother-in-law, who was been a weightlifter, a big strong guy, he was trying to manipulate her legs so that they wouldn't be sore or anything like that. And it was really, very painful. And then at the door comes a huge black guy in white, and he says, "Hello everybody, my name's Godson. You can call me God for short." So they laughed, "Hello God." And he said to my mother, "I believe you're in a lot of pain." She said, "Yes, I am." He said, "I've come to fix you up." And he touched her legs, he put them this way and that way, and suddenly she said, "Oh, that's fine. First time for weeks, months, I can't feel any pain at all." And she said, "I think I'll go to sleep." She fell asleep, and my sister tells me she was sitting there, and after about 20 minutes, she realized she wasn't breathing anymore. She died, and she died without pain. And they went to look for this Godson to thank him. The hospital said, "We've got no Godson." They described him, and they said, "Nobody like that whatsoever. We don't have any male nurses like that." So what's the answer? I have the faintest idea. I just tell you the story.
And coincidence on coincidence, you learned about your mother's death from your sister who called you.
Yes. Well, what happened was I was here, and I was expecting it, and my daughter, my sister, I got up Sunday morning, it was a phone call for me. My sister told me what had happened, and I sat there feeling a bit sorry for myself. And then Mike Hartman phoned me, And it didn't surprise me because Melanie's mother and my mother were very good friends. They used to compete about grandchildren, you know. And so I wasn't surprised. And he said to me, "Oh, heard the news?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, that was so tragic." I said, "Yes." "She's such a beautiful woman." "Very kind of you." "Yes, thank you." You know. He said, "So young." Hang on, she was 85. I said, "Mike, where did you hear the news?" He said, "Well, on TV." I said, "You heard about my mother on TV?" He said, "No, Princess Diana." And he was thinking, "Oh my goodness, I'll put my foot in it." I'm thinking, "Why the Princess Diana died?"
You came here, your children were 12 and 15 years of age.
Yes.
They adjusted to Hong Kong. Did Hong Kong become home
They
for
loved
them?
it. They loved it. They'd understood the pressures, the tensions we were under. But the thing we had to get them to understand, in Rhodesia we had a lot of money, but there was nothing to buy. I mean, there was a year, I remember, there was no cheese. And if you wanted a car, you had to wait to put your name down 10 years. And I remember trying to explain to them, in Hong Kong, you can buy anything, but we're not going to have a lot of money. And they couldn't. They said, "Why would you want to buy a car?" I said, "You go and buy a car." And that's something they actually couldn't get into their heads, that you could do that.
Was it possible for you to set up and bring all your money to Hong Kong?
No, not at all. When you left, the money was frozen. All you could take, which we did, was your furniture. It had to be certified that it was 4 years old, so got a Jewish guy to certify it was 4 years old. And you could take a certain amount of jewellery. And we said, "What is a certain amount?" "A certain amount's a certain amount." So we never knew you were going to be stopped. So Kitty hid a lot of stuff. And when we got to Johannesburg, which was our first stop, Kitty did a kind of audit, and there was a pair of emerald earrings missing. And we thought, well, that's just one of the losses we've had. And some time later, when she was knitting a jersey, out of a ball of wool falls the 2 emerald earrings. But we couldn't take any money. Money was frozen there. Now, I had, at that time, I remember about $40,000 there, which then was about £40,000. But when they were issuing $100 trillion notes, 40,000, they stopped sending me accounts when the stamps were worth more than the money.
You've been here now 29 years. Did your children make their roots in Hong Kong also?
The children, well, they went to school here. They went to university in England. My son to Exeter, Danny to Exeter, Natalie to Durham. And they were conscious of not having roots, because at that stage we didn't know where we were going to stay. I mean, were we going to stay here? Would we be able to stay here, etc. And I think they were always quite keen to settle down. And although they both came back here for a time, eventually they ended up in England, where they and our grandchildren are.
You came here, you started work with the government. In 1993 you took silks, they became a very senior barrister in Hong Kong.
Senior meaning old.
Senior meaning very experienced and very well respected. On that route, have you, as a very obvious Jewish man, Zionism has been important to you, have you encountered any anti-Semitism here in Hong Kong? Have you ever felt uncomfortable, either professionally or personally, in this environment?
No, is the simple answer. I mean, that's one of the wonders of living in Hong Kong. No anti-Semitism. Chinese people have always regarded, as I understand it, Judaism as just another Michigas, like Baptists or something like that. We've had none whatsoever. No anti-Israel, nothing. And for that matter, I have to say, even growing up in Rhodesia, I didn't.
And professionally, this has been a good place for you. It was a good choice. You still enjoy your law as much as you ever did?
Enjoy. It's perhaps a small E. Yes. But yes, things have worked out very well for us. We were very lucky getting the right cases at the right time.
And you're still as active in court as ever. You're often
Yes.
in the Court of Final Appeal
Yes.
here. You're
Yes.
doing trials regularly. You see an ongoing professional life as well as personal life here in Hong Kong? Or?
Well, I see a personal life here in Hong Kong. Professional, I'm not sure. I'm 72, you know. I mean, me and Wingo Star was 72. We've got to stop sometime.
Well, maybe now is the time to start to take up the drums, you know.
Maybe.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Clive. Ladies and gentlemen, if anybody has any questions, we'll take a couple before we finally let Clive escape. Yes. Yes, Dave.
Compared with that man, you were a lot younger, about 20 years younger. When you were in Rhodesia, did you ever meet a white man? He was in the government and eventually came to Hong Kong and became very senior. His name is Kenneth Kinghorn.
Sorry, it doesn't ring a bell at all. Kinghorn doesn't ring a bell at all.
He retired as District Commissioner, New Territories in 1969. He told me the story about Rhodesia is that the white community was so small that when he was there as a young man, there were only 3 of them in the government, 3 white men. And he had to wait for the 4th one, agronomist, who joined from London so that they could have a bridge party.
How possible? But I don't remember the name.
Sylvain.
Can I ask you what the origin from your parents, where they came from?
Yeah, my parents were both born in England, but my mother's family came from the Ukraine, my father's from Lithuania.
As Stu just mentioned bridge, I understand that you and Ketty have this remarkable psychic ability when it comes to bridge.
Well, we've married 45 years, and my advice to you young people is never play bridge with your wife. It's one of the major causes of divorce in the world. But we used to play a lot. In fact, the JCC had a very good bridge team indeed, but except for Nancy, she's about the only one left, I'm afraid.
Jonathan.
I'd like to hear more about your career here in Hong Kong, because I know that you're a well-known legal personality, but I really don't know much about what you've done in the last 20 years or so. Were you working for the government, or...?
I worked for the government as a prosecutor until 1994, then I went into private practice.
You became the director of public prosecution.
Deputy director of public prosecutions, yeah.
Well, I mean, what kind of things stand out and as main memories of that time?
Of being in the government?
Well, both. Being in the government, that's it.
Well, being in the government was, I was very lucky, I have to say. Having been pushed into the carrion case, I got very senior very quickly, and used to do a lot of traveling. Not so much since I've been in private practice. But I remember once I had to go to Las Vegas when I was in the government to there was a conference on organized crime, and I was giving a paper on it. And what I remember particularly about that function was we had a dinner that night. Now, the place was full of American sheriffs and all. They all wanted to know how they could get, if you caught a drug trafficker, could you have his car and that kind of thing. So they're all kind of Smokey and the Bandit type guys, you know, really, really tough. And the guest of honor, there was 2. There was Colonel Tom Parker, who was Elvis Presley's manager, and there was Ernest Borgnine. And Ernest Borgnine was giving the speech, and he was doing it in a way which would embarrass English people, I have to say, but it didn't embarrass the Americans, and he was saying, "We're proud of you. We're proud of every single one of you. You." And all these big smoking the band guys all weeping away, and their wives with their arms around there. It's the most disgusting sight I've ever seen.
Yes.
Clive, since the handover in '97, have you noticed what major changes have you noticed in the law?
In the law? Well, the law develops, but I have to say that we've been very lucky. The rule of law has been maintained. Our courts have been independent. We've had some fine judges, one of whom is here at the moment, my partner. I say that not because he's my friend, but because the whole legal community would agree with me. And we still, as far as the law is concerned, there's been really basically not much change, to say. I suppose there's far fewer white faces, that's all.
It's true to say you've been very much part of Hong Kong legal development. In the Bar Association, you've been very involved with standards and making sure rule of law is applied in Hong Kong. And that's an ambassador role that you've enjoyed playing as part of a senior lawyer in Hong Kong.
I think that overstates it a bit, I have to say. But we teach the younger people, the pupils as we call them, the virtues of integrity. And that's what we drill into the young people, the virtues of integrity and honesty.
Ladies and gentlemen, if there are no more questions, it leaves me to say Shana Tova to all of you, and to Clive Grossman, thank you very much indeed.